And what's the data on that? I mean, does that broken windows policing, does that actually work? I mean, do people know if it works?
The criminologists will tell you that they don't know, actually, that there was a profound drop in violent crime that took place all around the United States between starting in the early 90s, but it took place in cities that used broken windows theories and cities that didn't use them.
Right.
So nobody knows, and it's a really odd thing, actually. If you call criminologists and you ask them why is the crime rate dropping, pretty much every single one will give you a different answer, or they'll just say, man, I don't know.
I know the real answer.
Which is really odd.
I mean, for me, it's lead.
That theory. Yep.
I subscribe to the leaded gasoline restrictions, but well, I mean, I think there's actually a lot of data that show that both nationally and internationally, criminologists don't necessarily want to. That's a much tougher thing for criminologists to accept because you don't want to be you don't want to be a film camera shooter and have video show up. Let's put it that way.
Right, exactly.
But so there's no data as to whether or not it's successful, but there's clearly data that it's focused on specific communities, harassing certain specific communities, and basically making certain communities feel like they're being targeted for, crimes, I've got that in quotes, that they wouldn't be targeted if they were somewhere else. I mean, I also, in New York City, this is a big confession day for me, but back 20 years ago, I was also stopped by a police officer for urinating in the city. It was a construction site, so it wasn't like I was doing on the street, but...
You really had to go?
I really had to go. I was on my way to that frying pan. I think it was it was a ship on the side of like down I don't know, off the Chelsea Piers, before the Chelsea Piers was there. And the cop, like, it was embarrassing, and but then he was just like, all right, get going. I mean, all of these things. Right. If I was not a fairly benign looking, mid 20, 25, 30-year-old guy would have, could have easily been a much uglier situation.
Right, absolutely. I mean, look,
I should say white,
really
incidentally.
Clear.
I mean, I hope that's understood when I talk about myself.
At the height of this kind of policing, they were stopping about 700,000 people a year in New York, and that's actually at a rate that's significantly lower than what they were doing in places like LA and Chicago. And consistently between 80 and 90% of the people they stopped were black and Hispanic. And this is in a city that's more than half white. And in the lawsuits that came out against programs like Stop and Frisk, you heard lots and lots of testimony, some of it that came in the form of recorded remarks that were surreptitiously taped by police officers, where cops were basically told by their superiors, I have no problem telling you that I want you to go out and stop male blacks from the age of 14 to 21. So, it was really unequivocal what they were doing. There's no question that there was a huge disparity, but the argument about this isn't even about whether or not they were doing it. The people who defend these programs will say, well, it works, and that's where the crime is. But if you listen to the arguments, they're not saying that they're not profiling people. What they're saying is that profiling works, which is a very strange and bizarre thing.
Well, what makes it strange and bizarre? Just that they just don't think that the rights of these people are relevant in this conversation.
Well, it's also bizarre that a lawyer would go into a courtroom accused of massive civil rights violations, and specifically accused of stopping people on the basis of their skin color or their demographic, right, like where they live, and come back with an answer that we do this because it works.
Right.
It's not even a legal defense. It would be, it doesn't fulfill the requirements of counter argument. And that's one of the things that happened in the case when they finally went to trial about this. They didn't really have an answer for what they were doing, apart from their contention that that's where the crime is. I think that contention is hugely flawed, because if you were to start doing what they do in, I don't know, East New York or Bed-Stuy or in Park Hill in Staten Island, like the really hardcore neighborhoods where they stop people a lot. If you were to start doing that on Wall Street and start pulling open briefcases and emptying pockets and doing God knows what, I'm sure you'd rack up a huge number of drug charges and probably some other things too, and you'd have plenty of resisting if you did that. But the legend is that all the crime happens in these other neighborhoods, and the reality of what these programs are designed to do is that they're designed really to be border enforcement. And that's one of the things that makes it so interesting that all this took place during the context of Trump's run, is because these broken windows programs are, anecdotally anyway, if you talk to people, the heaviest kind of enforcement takes place like sort of on the lines between neighborhoods, right? So if you have an upscale white neighborhood and a black neighborhood, it's in that 2 or 3 block area between where the black neighborhood turns into the white neighborhood that you have the highest likelihood of being stopped, being frisked, being asked where you're going, right? Because what they're really trying to do is satisfy their sort of wealthy white voter and donor base, by making sure that the quote-unquote wrong people and wrong element doesn't end up in those neighborhoods, and that's what these programs end up being used to do. It's a kind of amorphous border enforcement.
Right, like some type of, like, they're a security force for the metaphorically gated community, I guess. That
exactly.
They don't want. Or they're a security force for a gated community where the people are not allowed to leave.
Right. It's both things. And the interesting thing about it is it happens irrespective of who's the mayor, what the mayor's mandate is supposed to be. I mean, Bill de Blasio was elected. One of the reasons he was elected is because he campaigned against all this stuff and said he wanted to change it all. But the first thing he did was put the sort of grandfather of these programs as his commissioner, Bill Bratton. And it's very much like The Wire. If you've watched it, what the first thing that you find out when you become mayor is that you have to satisfy a relatively small but regular revolving cast of important people in order to stay mayor and stay in power. And the first thing that all of these people ask for is they want increased police protection, and they want it in certain places. And that's how somebody like Bill de Blasio goes from being a candidate against the police to being, somebody who deployed the police in the same way that Mike Bloomberg did.
Hi, folks. Sam Seder here. We still need your help on our Patreon page. YouTube ads have come back, but not nearly as much as we had before. So if you can help us out, any little bit helps. Head over to our Patreon page right at this URL, and you'll help us keep helping you by making videos